You remember when Valve was like, hey guys, we got a new Half-Life game coming, and everybody was like, Half-Life 3 confirmed, it's finally happening! And then they released Half-Life Alyx, and everybody was like, kind of disappointed, because it wasn't what they wanted. But Half-Life Alyx was actually a pretty good game, so that's what I'm thinking about today as I'm reviewing this new camera for DJI from Caddx. Hey guys, we're finally getting a camera from Caddx that's for DJI, and it's gonna be... And it's the Caddx Polar. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're gonna learn something today. All of the products that you're going to see in this video were sent to me by their respective manufacturers. I did not purchase them with my own money. I have not received any cash or other compensation in exchange for this video, and no one has had any pre-approval or preconditions on the contents of this video before it was released. Let's start by taking a look at the Caddx Polar, and then we will compare it a little later in the video to the Runcam MIPI. And you might ask, why are we talking about these two cameras when clearly the best camera you can get today for DJI is the Caddx Vista camera, or the original DJI Air unit camera. It's the same thing. But you can't get that anymore. They've stopped making it. And unless you have a secret source, then if you have a secret source, then contact me. I'll pay almost anything. No. Okay, so you can't get the Vista camera. Well, the next best thing is the Caddx Nebula Pro, and I did a detailed comparison of those two cameras. I'll put a link in the video description if you want to see what the Caddx Nebula Pro looks like, but you can't get it either. And it's not that they've stopped making it, it is that they can't make it anymore, because at this time we are in the middle of a global silicone shortage. You can't get the chips that they need to make these electronic components. And it's not just the FPV community, it's everything from cars to consumer electronics to appliances. Everybody is struggling. So then, what should we use? And that brings us to the topic of today's video, because the Caddx Polar and the Runcam MIPI are two cameras that you can actually buy today. And even though they're not like the best you could possibly get, the ability to get them at all means that for some people, they're going to be the right choice. So we're going to start out looking at the Caddx Polar, and I think in terms of image quality, Caddx has really done a good job here. I am well on record as saying that the Nebula Nano, I consider it to be basically unusable unless you are building a very, very small build and you absolutely need the lightest possible weight, like a little digital toothpick. I would absolutely fly this, the Caddx Polar in terms of image quality. I would have no problem with it. Is it as good as the Nebula Pro or the Vista? It's okay though. But what is going to scare a lot of people away from this camera is that it has the same limitations of the Nebula Nano in terms of its capability. So it is locked in high quality mode. And that means that you can't go to low latency mode, 120 frames per second. You're locked at 60 frames per second. And that makes a bigger deal than you might think. I'll talk about that in just a second. What else is different about this one? You are locked in 16:9. You cannot go to 4:3, and you cannot do any of the image manipulation in the DJI menu, brightness, contrast, saturation, etc. You can't do that. Now, Caddx has given you the ability to connect an external joystick to the camera and do some basic image manipulation like brightness and contrast, and I guess that's okay. I mean, thanks for trying, Caddx, but a lot of people aren't going to want to solder up a joystick to their camera, and frankly, I'm not even sure you need to. The image quality is pretty good. So let's talk about that latency complaint again, because I am not usually a person who is super sensitive to latency. I usually just fly what I fly, I make the best of it, and I don't really complain. But I have found that the Nebula Nano's latency, I find it really difficult to fly. And I recently flew that in my review of the GepRC Smart 3.5. I'll put a link to that down in the video description. 3.5 inches might be the best freestyle build under 250 grams. So if you're looking for that, check that out when you're done here. But I found it very difficult to fly because I just was like, I kept wanting to crash into things. And I was like, how much latency is here? And actually the latency number that you get from the DJI Air unit is like only 40-45 milliseconds, which is totally flyable. But for some reason, I just kept struggling with it. And my guess is that the average latency is only 40-45 milliseconds as reported. That number has been tested by RC Shim, and he found it to be accurate. But I'm guessing that what's happening is that we're getting spikes in latency. We'll be at 40 milliseconds latency, and then suddenly we'll get a brief spike to 100 or so. I don't know, I'm making that number up. And you don't see that in the number on the screen, but it definitely affects. It felt very choppy and really bad. So I really struggled to fly with the Polar, just like I do with the Nano. Next, let's take a look at the Runcam MIPI. And your first thought when you hear there's a Runcam camera for DJI might be, I thought Caddx had the exclusive right from DJI to make cameras for the DJI system. And you're right, they do. And in fact, when Runcam released their Racer 4, a little more than a year ago, it also had DJI compatibility, and Caddx was very annoyed, but they didn't really do anything about it. And now Runcam is back with the MIPI. It turns out that the DJI system talks to the cameras over what's called the MIPI interface, and it is a standard protocol similar to HDMI or DisplayPort. It is not some kind of proprietary encrypted protocol. And that means that just anybody can make a MIPI compatible camera and make it work with the Air Unit and the Vista. But Caddx is super annoyed about this, and when the MIPI came out, they said that they would be taking steps to prevent this from happening in the future. So you might be wondering, if I buy a MIPI today, am I going to be prevented from using it, like by a firmware update at some point in the future? And Caddx said no. We asked them this. Me and Blunty on the FPV News asked them. They said no, they will not make changes to existing hardware to lock out this camera. In part because if they did that, they would also lock out their own cameras like the Runcam Nano. The Caddx Nano. So they don't want to do that. But at some point in the future, the next Air Unit, the next Vista, may come with firmware that means you can't use the Runcam MIPI with it. How much do you care about that? I mean, you're probably going to get that with some other camera that comes in the future. But if that does matter to you, then you want to be aware of that. As far as the image quality of the MIPI goes, again, you can decide for yourself. I am uploading this video in 4K, so hopefully YouTube will mangle it as little as possible. To me, the MIPI has a more contrasty image, and by the way, as far as I can tell, there is no way to adjust the image like you can on the Polar, so you just get what you get. It's a more contrasty image, but I find it to be acceptable to fly with. Not my favorite, but not so bad that I would be like, I can't do this. There's a little bit of lens flare on the MIPI. It has a very short lens barrel, and I think that results in a little bit of lens flare, but I didn't find it so distracting as to put me off. Now, the Runcam MIPI has the exact same limitations that the Caddx Polar and the Nebula Nano do, in that it's locked in 16:9 mode, it's locked in high quality 60 FPS mode, you can't do 120 FPS low latency, you can't do any image adjustment in the DJI goggles, and so forth. But I have to say, I was really surprised when I flew this that I actually didn't notice the latency like I did with the Polar and the Nebula Nano. In other words, I could tell it was you could say, how could you even tell of 10 or 15 milliseconds of extra latency? And I'm like, yeah, you're right. But when I flew the Nano and the Polar, I really struggled. My best guess is that the MIPI is having more consistent frame timing somehow. So I don't know how. But I totally found the MIPI to be flyable, and I found the Polar and the Nano to be very difficult to fly. Well, we can't do a review of a Starlight camera without taking it out at night, and here I am in a parking lot near my house because I can't fly at night without the FAA's permission. See, FAA, I'm being a good boy. And the first one we're going to look at is the Caddx Vista camera, and as you can see, it's not very good. It's not advertised as a nighttime camera. Here, under the lights of the parking lot, you will probably fly this, but as soon as we look like across the street, it gets just completely dark, and I'm wiggling it here so you can see if there's any blurriness. Some cameras in low light, they get super blurry, so they look bright, but then as soon as you start moving, they fall apart. Next, here's the Runcam MIPI, and it did surprisingly good at drawing in light and producing a bright image. But you can see from the huge amount of digital noise, especially in the darker parts of the image, it's doing that by just cranking the gain on the sensor. It is, in some senses, a usable image and certainly better than the Caddx Vista, but not very good. And here's your blurriness test. It's a little blurry, so they're opening up the shutter too. I'm not sure I would consider that to be great to fly with now that I see the amount of streaks. And finally, the Polar. And yeah, as you would expect from its massive image sensor, this is a really good nighttime image. No digital image noise, lots of light sensitivity. Wait till this truck goes out of the way and you can see across the street. We can see all the details in the parking lot across the street that were just black and the other cameras. This is a very, very good nighttime image. We'll do our little shaky shake test there, and the image is also staying relatively sharp. So Caddx Polar wins for nighttime. So that brings us to the end of the video, and as always, the question, which one should you buy? And frankly, for a lot of people, the answer is going to be whichever freaking one is in stock. Of the cameras that you can actually buy today, I would actively avoid the Nebula Nano. I would just hold off purchasing a ready to fly or bind and fly that had the Nebula Nano in it, and I would wait, because according to rumors, we may see more Nebula Pro sometime around the end of August. And if this is the future, and all of you guys are enjoying your hoverboards and your NVIDIA RTX 4000 series cards and your new fancy DJI cameras and whatever else you've got, can I come? But for me, the Polar is acceptable. I would be annoyed every time I tried to dive into some tight area and the latency kind of effed me over. But the image quality is pretty good, and it is nice that they give you the ability to adjust saturation, brightness, and so forth using an external joystick, even if you do have to solder it up. But honestly, of these three, the one that I would be most happy flying is the Runcam MIPI. Because for some reason, even though it's technically got the same latency, for some reason the latency actually felt way, way better on the Runcam than the Polar or the Nano, and that would make all the difference to me. And whichever one of these you decide to get, there are links down in the video description. And in case you're new here, they're affiliate links. And what that means is that you go to the store, you click the link, you go to the store, you buy anything. You want to buy this? You want to wait a couple months and buy Nebula Pro? Doesn't matter. Click the link just before you go to shop, fill up your cart, check out, and I get a small commission. And it's an easy way for you to support the work that I'm doing here, and it doesn't cost you anything. What do you think? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. Which of these would you take? Or are you just going to wait? Wish there was a way I could do a poll in the comments so we could all see. But tell me in the comments what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear. Thank you so much for watching. Happy flying.
You guys, I don't know where I am, and I don't know what's going to happen, but if I don't make it out of this, I just want to know that you subscribe to my channel, or maybe join my Patreon, or click one of these videos I picked out for you.